The Spring and Autumn Era. The decline of the feudal system resulted from the rising influence of a growing educated class who gained influence in government and commerce because of their ability. The word shi, which originally meant a knight, came to mean a literary person. States run by what later became a thriving bureaucracy gained power and consolidated themselves under monarchical government. As states began to tax individual landowners, peasants worked themselves free of their masters and practiced a labor-intensive agriculture for a mostly vegetarian diet. Millet was supplemented by wheat in the north and rice from the south, and soybeans helped to revive the soil. The Chun Chu, which means spring and autumn, summarizes important events by season and year in China from 1722 to about 470 BC. Though the extant text is written from the viewpoint of Lu and is dated by its rulers, the events listed include all the civilized states of China. During this period, a balance of power arose among the states of Qi, Qin, Jin, and Chu. Although the small state of Zhou in the middle was still recognized as the nominal ruler of the Chinese world. Mencius claimed that Confucius composed the Spring and Autumn Annals and quoted Confucius as saying that he would be understood and condemned for it. However, it is unlikely that this dry chronicle of events was composed by the philosophical Confucius. The work that describes the history of the Spring and Autumn era is the Tso Chuan, commentary by Tso, on the Chun Chu. Much of this work seems to be early writing, though some comments and prophecies may have been put in as late as the middle of the 4th century BC. This book does describe events more fully and offer moral lessons and occasional comments, some by Confucius. Followed by the period of warring states until the unification of China in 221 BC, this entire 500-year era was one of almost constant wars. In 722 BC, there were about 120 feudal states that acknowledged fealty to the Zhou king as the son of heaven. As the stronger states took over the weaker ones, by the end of the Spring and Autumn era, there were only about 40 states. In the period of the warring states, these are reduced to 7. And in 221 BC, the most powerful of these, Qin, established an empire named after them we call China. The feudal aristocracy eventually collapsed as ministers from powerful families enhanced their positions through war-making. As war became less chivalrous, infantry and cavalry replaced knights fighting with chariots. Instead of calling on vassals like family members, taxes were used to raise armies. Tenant farmers could own their own land, but heavy taxes and usury led to the consolidation of landowning by the wealthy. As the powerful families fought with each other, they turned for help to the educated class of officials, who gained influence in increasingly bureaucratized institutions. Thus, these were times of great change and social mobility, as aristocratic families were wiped out or banished to obscurity, and others with education or wealth earned in commerce or industry rose to great influence. In 719 BC, we find a high official of Lu advising his duke that violence is not the way to gain the support of one's people. Commenting on Zhou Shu, who rose to power in Wei by assassinating the previous duke, Zheng Zheng says that by relying on cruelty and military force, he has few followers and allies. Military force is like fire. If it is not kept in check, it may consume the user. Guan Zheng was poor, but was helped by his friend Bao Shuya. While the latter served one of the duke's sons, Xiaobo, Guan Zheng served another son, Zhu, under Duke Shi of Qi, who reigned from 730 to 698 BC. According to Han Feizi, Guan Zheng and Bao Zhu agreed to recommend the other to whichever prince succeeded. When Duke Shang, who reigned from 697 to 686 BC, was killed in a civil war, Xiaobo became Duke Huan and reigned from 685 to 645 BC. Ju was killed, and Guanzhong was imprisoned. However, Duke Guan of Qi appointed Guanzhong prime minister, even though Guan, in supporting his brother, had shot an arrow that hit his sash buckle in the struggle for power. Yet Bao Shuya stepped aside himself and recommended Guanzhong to Duke Guan, saying Guan's ability could give the Duke greater power. Though Bao worked under Guan, he was admired more because of his ability to appreciate men. Duke Guan wanted to begin by strengthening his armed forces, but Guanzhong recommended that he put his arms in storage, since for being on good terms with the feudal lords abroad and the people at home, expending wealth on people is better than spending it on arms. In the second year, Duke Guan went ahead with the production of arms anyway, and the year after that he wanted to attack Sung. But Guanzhong said that if the internal government is not strengthened, ventures abroad will not be successful. Duke Guan attacked Sung anyway, and the feudal lords helped Sung to defeat the troops of Qi. Continuing to defy Guan's advice, Duke Guan strengthened the armed forces and gave salaries to the brave. But Guan managed to keep the internal government in order secretly, even while those contending for salaries were slashing each other to pieces and breaking necks. Next, Duke Guan attacked Lu against Guan's advice. By 682 BC, Qi had assembled 100,000 armored troops and 5,000 chariots, but Guanzhong noted that there were other states just as powerful. Guan felt that since Qi was trying to use arms instead of moral force, the country was in danger. While the Duke of Lu threatened Duke Guan and himself with a sword, Guanzhong suggested a compromise that was accepted. After this, Duke Guan began to follow Guanzhong's advice, which warned that a prince should not be greedy for territory or devote himself to the use of arms, because it distresses the people and makes deceit prevalent. Instead of attacking them, Duke Guan enfeoffed several small states. Finally, Duke Guan agreed with Guanzhong to strengthen the country, and he lightened taxes, relaxed custom restrictions, and regulated government levies and salaries. Next, Guan suggested that he inquire after the sick and reward people rather than punish them. If he could do this for 5 years, the feudal lords would support him. After spreading around gifts abroad and domestically, and getting capable men to manage relations with other states, Duke Guan's political control increased such that when the Di people attacked, the feudal lords all sent troops to help and defeat the Di. Duke Guan followed the counsel of Guanzhong in encouraging the feudal lords to gather 3 years' provisions before strengthening their arms. His power was further advanced by offering to help militarily those who did this but still did not have enough armed forces. Finally, Guanzhong recommended that the relations between princes and ministers be harmonized by not setting up concubines as legal wives or killing their great ministers. Feudal lords were not to manipulate boundaries, hoard grain, or prohibit the gathering of natural resources. Once these policies were established for at least a year, then punishments and rewards could be implemented. Instead of the death penalty and corporal punishment, criminals could redeem themselves by supplying arms. As prime minister, Guanzhong instituted many other reforms, including state ownership of salt and iron. In an economic policy known as balancing the heavy and the light, he promoted commerce by standardizing weight scales and coins. Guanzhong shared the people's likes and dislikes by giving them what they wanted and abolishing what they rejected. Sima Qian quotes from the book named Quanzi. When the granaries are full, the people will understand social codes and moderation. When their food and clothing are adequate, they will understand honor and disgrace. If the sovereign complies with the rules, the 6 relationships will be secure. If the 4 guidelines do not prevail, the nation will perish. The orders handed down like the source of a river will be in accord with the hearts of the people. The 6 relationships are with father, mother, elder brother, younger brother, wife, and children. And the 4 guidelines or virtues are propriety, justice, integrity, and conscience. Guan also wrote that knowing that to give is to receive is the most precious thing in governing. Confucius credited Guanzhong with helping Duke Huan to bring unity and order to the entire realm, which they still enjoyed 2 centuries later. Were it not for Guanzhong, Confucius admitted, they might be wearing their hair loose and folding their clothes like the barbarians. Guanzhong ordered the Lord of Yan to follow the governmental policies of the ancient Duke of Shao and insisted that Duke Huan keep his word in the Convention of Ko. With his reforms and skillful diplomacy, Guan helped Qi to become the most powerful state, and all of the feudal lords submitted to Qi. In 679 BC, Duke Huan of Qi achieved the power and prestige known as Pa, first noble, and acted as a protector of state affairs for the Zhou king. Until 591 BC, this office of first noble or protector was assumed by the most powerful of the rulers who repelled invasions, punished the disobedient, arbitrated differences among the state rulers, received the revenues that before had gone to the king, and even settled disputes among the royal family. When Guanzhong was dying, Duke Huan asked what he should do after his wise consular's death. Guan did not recommend his friend Bao Shuya to replace himself, because he was so inflexible in his hatred of evil that he would not forget a single deed to the end of his life. Then Guan suggested that the Duke send away 4 men who had ingratiated themselves into influence by denying their own children and families, and won his own body by castration. Such men will not love him. After Guan died, Duke Huan dismissed all 4 of them, but he then suffered a nervous breakdown and confusion in his court. So he restored the 4 men, but a year later they launched a coup against him. When the Duke died in 645 BC, they did not even bury his body. When the state of Jin was suffering a drought, Duke Mu of Qin refused to attack them, as one advisor had suggested, but sent them large shipments of grain. However, 2 years later, when Qin was suffering a famine, Duke Yiwu of Jin, who had broken numerous promises, refused to ship grain to Qin, but rather launched an attack against them in 645 BC. Duke Yiwu's chariot bogged down in the mud, and Duke Mu and his men tried to capture him, but were surrounded by the Jin army. However, Duke Mu was saved by 300 men he had earlier pardoned for eating one of his prize horses when they were starving at Mount Ji. Though Jin's army was larger, they lost because the Qin fighters were more spirited. The Zhou Chuan making the moral and psychological factors in warfare apparent. Duke Yiwu's advisor refused to rescue his duke caught in the mud because he had neglected his advice. Thus, Duke Yiwu was captured and taken to Qin, but Duke Mu released him because his wife, who was Yiwu's sister, and the Zhou sovereign requested it. He then made peace with Jin on the counsel that if he killed their ruler, hatred would be stored up. Abusing others is bad policy, doubling hatred and bringing about misfortune. When the Duke of Jin returned home, he had his advisor, who refused to flee, put to death for bringing about his defeat. Once again, Duke Mu of Qin sent grain to Jin in their time of need, treating their people with kindness, hoping that a competent ruler would appear. In the end, Qin did receive the land west of the Yellow River promised by Jin and began collecting taxes there. When Yiwu died in 637 BC, his older brother, Zheng also called Duke Wen, returned from 20 years' exile, and with Duke Mu's help overcame Yiwu's son Yu to gain the rulership of Jin. In 632, he defeated the Chu at Chengpu, and he withdrew from Yuan even though they were about to capitulate in order to keep his word. Duke Wen of Jin was appointed Pa, or protector, of the feudal rulers. The opposing general withdrew because of 3 military maxims. When facing an equal, retire. When difficulties lie ahead, withdraw. and a virtuous man cannot be opposed. When Duke Wen offered to restore the rulers of Cao and Wei, these rulers broke off their alliance with Chu. Though before he had tried to provoke an attack, now Duke Wen graciously withdrew when the Chu general attacked him, because Chu had showed him kindness in his exile. Finally, victorious over Chu, Duke Wen called for an audience with the Zhou sovereign, for which he was later criticized by the traditional Confucius. How the chivalry in war was disappearing can be seen in an incident in which a Sung official turned his halberd around to pull his opponent out of a well, after which the opponent killed him. The commentator declares that he had departed from propriety and disobeyed orders in saving his enemy, and therefore deserved to die. Filial piety is shown in the story of a starving man who is given food by Zhao Dun, but he packs up half of it to take to his mother. Later, the same man, while acting as one of the Duke's guards, turned his halberd against the other guards who were going to kill Zhao Dun for criticizing his wicked ruler. Later, the ruler was assassinated before Zhao Dun had crossed the border. So he returned, but did not punish the assassin, although they did send for the legitimate successor. A historian wrote that Zhao Dun assassinated his ruler, and Confucius declared that Zhao Dun was a good official who accepted a bad name for the sake of a principle. The morality of the Zhou Chuan is that attacking the rebellious is an act of punishment, and being gentle with the submissive is an act of virtue. Loyalty was also highly valued. One emissary who was caught agrees to be bribed in order to fulfill his mission, even though he had to lie and break a promise to the bribers. Yet, filial loyalty had its limits too. Wei Gou's father, when he became ill, asked him to see that his concubine was married. But when the illness became worse, he asked that she be killed and buried with him. The son followed the earlier orders when his father's mind was clearer. And he was later rewarded when he captured an old man in battle who appeared to him in a dream to tell him that he was the woman's father and was thanking him. Yet truthfulness was so valued by historians that 3 brothers were executed in succession for writing that a usurper had assassinated the duke. When the 4th brother stepped forward, the murderer finally relented. 2 years later, the assassin and his family were killed by a fellow prime minister. The incessant wars between Jin and Chu led Hyang Su of Sung to go to Jin with a proposal for a comprehensive peace. He said, "War is destructive to the people, an insect that eats up the resources, and the greatest calamity of the small states," arguing that if Jin did not accept the proposal, Chu would agree and draw all the states together. Jin agreed in order to keep the protectorship. Then he went to Chu, and they agreed also. Qi was reluctant to join, but realized that it would disaffect the people if they refused to sanction the stopping of war. Hyang Su sent word to Qin, and they agreed. He notified all the smaller states and arranged a meeting at Sung in 545 BC. Jin and Chu argued about which of them should have precedent, but agreed to share the protectorship through Qin, although Qin and Qi were formally accepted because of their power, and Zhu and Tong because of their weakness. Otherwise, all 14 states agreed to the covenant of peace. Hyang Su asked for a reward for arresting the cause of death, unquote, and was given 60 towns. However, Zhu Han, the Minister of Works, declared that it was the arms of Jin and Chu that kept the smaller states in awe. "Who can do away with the instruments of war?" he asked. "They have been long in requisition. It is by them that the lawless are kept in awe and accomplished virtue is displayed." Denouncing the scheme as a delusion, he cut the document to pieces. Hyang Su consequently refused the towns, and his family wanted to attack Zhu Han. But Huang stopped them, saying that he had been saved from ruin by him. Nevertheless, this agreement must have been effective for several years because there were no wars for the next 5 years, only a battle with barbarians in the 6th year, and no wars in the 7th and 8th years. This is by far the most peaceful part of the 2.5 centuries of the spring and autumn era, during which there was only one other time in which there were even 2 years in a row without a war. During this lull, the ducal son of Wu made the following observations about music, with their obvious implications for diplomacy in Chinese culture. Direct but not overbearing, distant but not perfidious, varied but not to excess, repetitive but not tiresomely so, plaintive but not downcast, joyous but not unbridled, employing but never depleting, expansive without being assertive, doling out, yet not to a prodigal degree, gathering in, yet not in a greedy manner, resting without stagnating, moving forward without becoming unduly facile. The 5 notes are harmonized, the 8 airs well balanced, movements that are measured, restraints that are properly ordered. These are the qualities shared by all who abound in virtue. Likewise, in the same peaceful period, the Jing Prime Minister, Zhu Chan, disagreed with an official who suggested they abolish the village schools where they gathered to discuss government administration. This is what he said. Why do that? In the morning and evening, when the people are at leisure or have finished their work, they gather to discuss the good and bad points of my administration. The points they approve of, I encourage, and those they criticize, I correct. They are my teachers. Why would I want to abolish them? I have heard of wiping out resentment by loyal service and good works, but I have never heard of stopping it by force. True, one can cut it off for a time, but it is like damming up a river. When there is a major break in the dikes, many persons are bound to suffer. If the people's resentment were to break out in the same way, I would never be able to save the situation. It is better to have a little break in the dikes for the water to drain off. It is better that I hear the people's complaints and make them my medicine. Zhu Chan also advises Zhu Pi not to put Yin Ho in charge of a city because he is too young and inexperienced to handle this responsibility. One should learn before entering government, not enter government in order to learn. Decisions made by the nobles during the feudal period were increasingly taken over by the rulers and ministers of the states. But laws were not promulgated in writing until the state of Qing cast the criminal code in bronze in 536 BC. This formalizing of the law was protested by a Jin official as arbitrarily taking away from the judgment of superiors. When laws are exactly defined, he argued, people will lose respect for their superiors and, in a conscientious spirit, try to get away with whatever does not violate the letter of the law. Such laws indicated the government has fallen into disorder. Punishments were used and could be severe, especially in military situations. In civil matters, fines were often exacted, though great officers were rarely punished. King Ling came to power in Chu by murdering his nephew and was never able to control his violent tendencies. 3 of his younger brothers revolted, and he was replaced and died in 529 BC. He was not able to live up to the old saying quoted by Confucius, "To overcome oneself and return to propriety is the way of benevolence." Sun Tzu's Art of War. According to the historian Sima Qian, Sun Tzu was given an audience in the state of Wu. Having read the 13 chapters of Sun Tzu's Art of War, the king of Wu, who reigned from 514 to 496 BC, invited him to demonstrate the drilling of troops with the king's concubines. Sun Tzu explained the commands for marching, and the women all answered, "Yes, sir." But when the drum signals were given, the women burst out laughing. Sun Tzu realized that if the orders are not clear and the signals not familiar, it is the general who is at fault. He repeated the signals several times, but the women responded by laughing again. Believing that when the signals are clear, but not followed. It is the officers who are at fault. Sun Tzu ordered the left and right commanders, two of the king's favorite concubines, beheaded. The king sent a messenger to stop the executions, but Sun Tzu disregarded the sovereign's command. After the two commanders were beheaded and replaced, the women obeyed orders with serious precision. Not wanting to watch, but impressed with Sun Tzu's military ways, the king appointed him commander of his army. According to Sima Qian, Sun Tzu wrote The Art of War after having his feet amputated. This book on military strategy and tactics has been very influential throughout Chinese history and is still respected by military minds today. Though astute for a military context, its ethics is typical of a war mentality. Sun Tzu outlines the art of war making in relation to 5 factors he calls moral law, heaven, earth, the commander, and method and discipline. However, his concept of moral law has been reduced to complete accord with the ruler, so that the soldiers will follow him in disregard of their own lives or danger. Heaven refers to weather and time factors. Earth concerns distances, terrain, and the chances of life and death. The virtues of a good commander are wisdom, sincerity, benevolence, courage, and strictness. Method and discipline include the divisions and ranks of the army, maintenance of roads and supplies, and military expenditures. Sun Tzu declares that all warfare is based on deception. Thus, not only the value of life is disregarded, but truthfulness as well. Calculations are made to assure that victory over the enemy is achieved. Sun Tzu is extremely clever and observant of ways to take advantage of the enemy's situation. Nonetheless, his goal is not to kill the enemy, but to break the enemy's resistance without fighting if possible. Taking over the opponent's territory is preferable to destroying them. The general's first aim is to balk the enemy's plans. Second, to prevent the joining of their forces. Third, to attack them in the field. And the worst policy is to besiege a walled city. For Sun Tzu, knowledge of oneself and the enemy is what leads to victory. To know oneself and be ignorant of the enemy will result in defeats as well as victories. And to be ignorant of both will surely end in disaster. Spies are recommended to gain knowledge of the enemy's situation and plans. Sun Tzu says that the enlightened ruler plans ahead, and a good general cultivates his resources, controls his soldiers with authority, brings them together by good faith, and makes them useful with rewards. He clearly recommends careful discretion as well as valor in the following admonitions. Move not unless you see an advantage. Use not your troops unless there is something to be gained. Fight not unless the position is critical. No ruler should put troops into the field merely to gratify his own spleen. No general should fight a battle simply out of pique. Anger may in time change to gladness. Vexation may be succeeded by content. But a kingdom that has once been destroyed can never come again into being. Nor can the dead ever be brought back to life. Hence, the enlightened ruler is heedful and the good general full of caution. This is the way to keep a country at peace and an army intact. Thus, Sun Tzu offers intelligent advice for military commanders, but he never questions the ethics of a system that uses violence and deceit to take advantage of other people's weaknesses. The state of Wu became the greatest military power in China in 482 BC, but merely 9 years later they were destroyed and annexed by Yue, which was eventually taken over by Chu in 334 BC. Period of warring states. Our knowledge of the quarter of a millennium ending in 221 BC, with the founding of the Qin Empire, comes mostly from the Zhang Guozi, Intrigues of the Warring States, and the Shiqi by Sima Qian, which contains the earliest biographies. Sima Qian preceded Tacitus and Plutarch by 2 centuries. During this period, wars became larger and worse as iron and even steel were used as weapons, and millions of peasants as infantry. The powerful crossbow cocked with the feet became the weapon of choice in the 5th century BC. And in the next century, cavalry replaced chariots. Iron also enhanced industry and agriculture, and large irrigation projects led to increased population and the building of great cities. Ministers could enhance their power and influence by recommending and winning wars with other states. These officials often went from one state to another and used their abilities to persuade rulers to gain high offices. Powerful families struggled for power, as in Jin, where all but 4 were eliminated from contention. The most powerful family was then destroyed by the cooperation of the Zhao, Wei, and Han, who established states in 453 BC, which were recognized by the Zhou king 15 years later. The last remnant of the Duke of Jin's territory was divided by these 3 states in 376 BC. In the far north, the state of Yan developed. Another man who wrote a book on the art of war was Wu Ji. He was a native of Wei and loved to command troops. When Qi attacked Lu in 408 BC, Lu wanted to make him their general, but they distrusted him because Wu's wife was from Qi. However, the ambitious Wu Qi killed his wife to become Lu's general in their attack on Qi. He was also accused of killing more than 30 of those who ridiculed him in Wei. Later, Wu Ji was appointed by Marquis Wen of Wei as general to attack Qin, even though he was greedy and lecherous, because he could command troops better than anyone. He ingratiated himself with the next Marquis of Wei by arguing that virtue is the treasure of the state. When suspicions rose against him, Wu Ji left Wei again and became Prime Minister of Chu, where he strengthened the army and criticized the traveling rhetoricians who tried to persuade rulers to join alliances and counter-alliances. Wu Ji helped Chu overcome the southern tribes, annexed 2 small states, fended off the 3 Jin states in the north, and attacked Qin in the west. However, the nobles' resentment was so great against him that when King Dao died, they revolted and attacked Wu Ji, who laid across the corpse of the king and was killed. When the heir succeeded, all those who had hit the king's body while shooting at Wu Ji were executed, wiping out 70 families. Wei Yang, known as the Lord of Shang or Shangyang, was recommended by the ailing Prime Minister of Wei to succeed him. But King Hui of Wei did not take this advice, nor the advice that he should kill Yang if he does not make him Prime Minister. Wei Yang went to Qin and persuaded Duke Xiao to institute new ordinances in 359 BC. People were organized into groups of 5s and 10s to control one another by being responsible for reporting each other's crimes. Those who denounced culprits were given the same rewards as those who decapitated an enemy, and those who did not denounce a criminal received the same punishment as the criminal. Titles and honors were ranged in a detailed hierarchy. Agriculture and the military were emphasized to the exclusion of all other professions. These laws were not effective until they mutilated the heir's tutor and tattooed his preceptor for the crimes of the crown prince, who himself had his nose sliced off a few years later for another crime. Those who criticized the new laws were threatened with banishment. Strict laws and the increased taxation of strong government enhanced the wealth and power of the Jin state. After Wei was weakened by an attack from Qi, Qin took advantage and attacked Wei in 340 BC. Wei Yang invited Wei's Prince Ong to discuss peace, but betrayed Wei by capturing the prince, causing Wei's King Hui to regret he had not taken his old prime minister's advice to kill Wei Yang. Losing western territory to Qin, Wei had to move their capital east to Daliang. Yang was enfeoffed with 15 cities and named Lord Shang. But after 10 years as prime minister of Qin, the rancor against him had grown. According to the historian Sima Qian, Zhao Liang advised him to turn inward and control himself. Jiao Lang criticized Xiangyang for neglecting the 100 families, building promulgation towers, and crippling people with savage punishments. The Lord of Shang could not even go out without a strong armed guard. Jiao Lang suggested he return the 15 cities, tend gardens, and recommended the king exalt men of the mountains, nourish the aged, preserve the orphans, respect the elderly, promote the meritorious, and honor the virtuous. Xiangyang did not heed this advice. When Duke Xiao died, he had to flee the successor's orders for his arrest. Xiangyang went to Wei, but they considered him a traitor and a criminal and forced him back into Qin, where in 338 BC he was killed and torn apart by chariots as a warning to rebels. The historian Ban Gu, who lived from 32 to 92 in CE, in the 1st century, wrote that Xiangyang destroyed the well-field system of sharing land. With private ownership of land, commoners who became wealthy were able to encroach on the land of the peasants. The legalist philosopher Han Feizi admired Xiangyang for emphasizing rewards and punishments, and he mentions Shen Buhai for using methods of governing with responsible officers by matching actualities with their names or concepts. Shen Buhai served Marquis Zhao of Han as prime minister for at least 15 years until he died in 337 BC. Sima Qian wrote that during this time the state was well run, the troops were strong, and no one encroached on Han, not an easy accomplishment in a weak state during this period. Shen Buhai worked to regulate and instruct the people by using methods and techniques that awarded offices according to the abilities of individuals and the responsibilities of the positions. He was one of the first to emphasize the clarification of language so that actions matched words and concepts. Although often lumped together with the legalists because of his development of the bureaucratic system, Shen Buhai was really more influenced by Taoist ideas than by the policies of Xiangyang. The ruler is to practice complete acquiescence so that his only concerns are for the people. He does not act himself Wu Wei, but lets the ministers perform their designated functions according to technique rather than theory. Nevertheless, the intelligent ruler does have discriminating laws and methods according to definite principles, though he dims his luster while peacefully ordering the world with correct words. Bad rulers try to do things themselves, use perverted words, and thus cause disorder. The wise ruler is careful not to give too many commands, but relies on the methods and techniques of well-placed and trained officers. Shen said, "If the ruler's intelligence is displayed, men will prepare against it. If his lack of intelligence is displayed, they will delude him. If his wisdom is displayed, men will gloss over him. If his lack of wisdom is displayed, they will hide from him. If his lack of desires is displayed, men will spy them out. If his desires are displayed, they will tempt him. Therefore he says, I cannot know them. Only non-action can control them." Every official is responsible for good order. If the ruler takes too much initiative, the ministers will refrain from criticizing in order to keep their positions. They will curry favor and cease to be the eyes and ears and mind for the ruler. When the ruler tries to use his own limited eyes, ears, and mind alone, the state is doomed. A better way is to cultivate technique and practice supervision. A quiet mind waits for the right time and then responds. Pure, impartial, and simple, one can set everything straight. The one who does not take initiative has collaborators, and the one who does not go first has followers. Acquiescence is the ruler's technique. Action is the method of the minister. Therefore, whoever sees independently has clear vision, whoever hears independently has sharp hearing, and whoever can reach decisions independently is able to rule the whole world. Han's Marquis Zhao complained to Shensu that his method is difficult to use. Shensu replied that his method is to scrutinize achievement and give rewards and to bestow office based on ability. But the ruler is finding it difficult because he listens to the requests of courtiers. Later, Shensi requested that his cousin be appointed to an office. The Marquis responded by asking whether he should violate his doctrine or use technique and reject his petition. Shensi went home and asked to be punished. Yet, Shensi's book says that a ruler should use technique instead of punishment by persuading, supervising, and holding subordinates strictly responsible. Another incident also indicates that Shen Puhai may not have practiced what he preached, because he waited to advise his ruler until he knew what would please him, rather than using independent thinking. Su Jin grew up in Luoyang of eastern Zhou, but King Xian's courtiers did not trust him. So Su Jin went to advise the new ruler of Qin, King Hui. Having just executed Shang Yang, he did not like rhetoricians. So Su Jin was also unsuccessful in Zhao, but went on to Yan, where he convinced their ruler he must ally himself with Zhao against Qin. The Marquis of Yan sent Su Jin to Zhao, loaded with gifts, and there he persuaded the Marquis of Zhao that he must also be allied against the powerful Qin with the other 5 states. Then Su Jin got King Xuan of Han, King Xiang of Wei, the King of Qi, and the King of Chu, all to join the alliance against Qin. Thus, Su Jin became the master of the alliance of 6 states and served as prime minister for all of them. Wealthy and successful, Su Jin paid back all his previous debts and returned to Zhao, where he was enfeoffed. According to the historian, the soldiers of Qin did not dare to come out of the Hankou Pass for 15 years, although scholars doubt this. But then Qin got Qi and Wei to attack Zhao. Su Jin fled to Yan, and all the alliances collapsed. Qi took advantage of the death of Yan's ruler by attacking them. So Su Jin went to the king of Qi and convinced him to give 10 cities back to Yan and make peace with Qin as well. Su Jin returned to Yan, overcame the slanders of the Yan courtiers, and became the lover of the king's mother, which pleased the king. Yet Su Jin feared punishment and fled to Qi, where he was attacked by an assassin who escaped. While dying, Su Jin told the king to tear apart his dead body in the marketplace as a warning, and this led to the capture and execution of the assassin. When Su Jin's machinations were uncovered, Qi was furious with Yan, while Yan was terrified of Qi. Su Jin's younger brothers, Su Dai and Su Li, took over their brother's diplomatic work. Su Dai advised the king of Yan, the weakest of the states, to send hostages with Su Dai to Qi, but strife broke out in Yan. Qi attacked them and killed the Yan king and the new prime minister. The brothers were afraid to enter Yan and were treated well in Qi, but Dai was then sent to Sung, who was attacked by Qi. Dai wrote a letter to King Zhao of Yan, who welcomed him and planned an expedition against Qi. Though Qi had taken Sung in 286 BC, they were driven out of their own capital by Yan in 284. Qin summoned the king of Yan, but Su Dai advised him not to go, because achievements made states mortal enemies of the tyrannical Qin, who had recently killed hundreds of thousands in the 3 Jin states of Zhao, Wei, and Han. Thus King Zhao of Yan did not go to Qin, and Su Dai was exalted and sent to form alliances with the feudal lords, as his brother Su Qin had done. Some joined the alliance and others did not, but Su Dai and Li Su both died of old age, renowned among the feudal lords. Chang Yi of Wei studied with the same teacher as Su Qin. In Chu, Chang Yi was accused of stealing a jade disc and beaten. Chang Yi went to Zhao to see Su Qin, but was rejected and ended up in Qin, which was what Su Qin intended. Chang Yi was made prime minister on behalf of Qin. When the king of Wei died, the new king Ai would not listen to Chang Yi, so he secretly had Qin attack Wei. In defeating Han's army, Qin cut off 80,000 heads. Surrounded by dangerous states, Chang Yi now persuaded King Ai of Wei to ally himself with with powerful Qin. Chang'e returned to Qin in 317 BC to become their prime minister once more. 3 years later, Wei abandoned Qin for new alliances, but was attacked by Qin and served Qin again. Qin wanted to attack Qi, but Qi had allied itself with Chu. So Chang'e went to Chu to become their prime minister, offering King Huai of Chu territory and a daughter of Qin for an alliance. But meanwhile, Qi submitted to Qin. When the suspicious king of Chu attacked Qin, Qi helped Qin defeat Chu and cut off 80,000 heads. Qin demanded territory from Chu, and the Chu king requested Chang'e, whom he imprisoned. The queen of Chu pleaded for Chang'e, and King Huai released him and was persuaded by Chang'e to ally himself with Qin. Then Chang'e went to Han and convinced their king that with only 300,000 troops compared to more than 1 million in Qin, Han should ally itself with Qin and attack Chu. Chang'e returned to Qin, where he was made a lord of 5 towns before being sent off to the king of Qi, whom he persuaded to join Qin. He then succeeded in getting the kings of Zhao and Yan to serve Qin also. However, while Chang'e was returning to Qin, King Hui died and was replaced by King Wu, who disliked Chang'e. News of this caused all these states to renounce their alliance with Qin and return to their alliance with each other. Chang'e ended up as prime minister of Wei, where he died. The historian Sima Qin concludes that Su Qin and Chang'e were truly men capable of ruining a country. As Qin's power increased, so did schemes and treacheries. In 293 BC, Qin attacked Han and Wei and cut off 240,000 heads. And the next year they took 2 cities from Chu. In 288 BC, King Zhao of Qin pronounced himself Western Emperor, while the king of Qi declared himself Eastern Emperor. But the bloody wars still occurred frequently. During this time, 4 warlords arose who slowed the expansion of Qin. The lord of Meng Chang's father was a wealthy general in Qi. The son showed his ability by treating retainers better than his father had. He was invited to Qin, but Su Dai warned him not to go. Nevertheless, King Min of Qi sent the lord of Meng Chang to Qin on a mission, and King Zhao invited him to become prime minister of Qin. Advisors to King Zhao made him suspicious that the lord of Meng Chang would favor Qi, and so he was imprisoned. But he escaped. When he got back to Qi, King Min made him prime minister. The man who was to collect the lord of Meng Chang's income for him gave it to a worthy man and was demoted. But later, when Meng Chang was suspected of revolting, the worthy man offered himself as a guarantee and cut his throat in front of the palace. This stimulated King Min to investigate the case and clear Meng Chang, who decided to retire in Shua. Su Dai made Meng Chang jealous of the new prime minister Lu Li, so that Meng Chang wrote a letter to the prime minister of Qin, encouraging him to attack Qi. This led to Lu Li fleeing. After King Min destroyed Sung in 286 BC, he wanted to remove the lord of Meng Chang, who fled to Wei, where he became prime minister. Allied with Qin and Zhao and with Yan, attacked and defeated Qi, causing King Min to flee. The lord of Meng Chang was now independent of the feudal lords and allied himself with the new King Shang of Qi. When Meng Chang was prime minister of Qi and there was no harvest, he sent Feng Huan to collect his interest payments so that he could provide for his many retainers. Feng Huan wisely feasted the debtors while he determined who could pay and who could not. Those who could afford it had to pay by a certain date, but Feng Huan burned the tallies, the contracts on wood, of the other debtors. Nevertheless, the negative consequences of Meng Chang and his retainers were still felt generations later when the historian Sima Qian observed that the people in Shua were hot-tempered and violent. They explained, the lord of Meng Chang attracted the families of perhaps 60,000 highwaymen and criminals to Shua. Such was a legacy of this warlord. Chao's lord of Pingyuan caused the loss of 400,000 soldiers in a decisive battle with Qin at Chongping in 260 BC. In spite of the efforts of the lord of Xinling, called the noble scion of Wei by Sima Qin, Wei was also eventually defeated by Qin. The fourth warlord to succumb to the power of Qin was the lord of Chunshen in the state of Chu. In 256 BC, Qin attacked Han and killed 40,000, then attacked Zhao and beheaded or captured 90,000. The Zhou sovereign joined with feudal rulers to attack Qin, but when Qin attacked Zhou, its rulers submitted and surrendered its entire territory of 36 cities and 30,000 inhabitants. The next year, the Zhou people fled to the east, and the 9 sacred vessels passed into the hands of Qin, marking the final disappearance of the Zhou dynasty that had been only a figurehead for several centuries. Li Su of Chu studied the art of government with the Confucian philosopher Sun Tzu before going to Qin and advising Zheng, who became king of Qin in 246 BC. He suggested that the House of Zhou had been declining for a century, while Qin's power had increased. This king could unify the world. King Zheng secretly sent men out with gifts to the feudal lords who could be bribed and swords to kill those who were not. When the Qin clansmen wanted the king to expel all foreigners from his court, Li Su, a foreigner from Chu himself, persuaded him that foreigners have much to offer. Li Su rose from chief of scribes to commandant of justice and succeeded as prime minister the wealthy merchant Lu Buwei in 237 BC. In a decade, the armies of Qin successfully destroyed the 6 states of Han in 230 BC, Zhao 228, Wei 225, Chu 223, Yan 222, and Qi 221 to establish the Qin King Cheng as August Emperor Huangdi of China. The period of warring states had been ended by the formation of a tyrannical military empire. Qin, the most powerful one, was in the west, and Qi was in the east, and Chu was in the south, and Jin, which broke into the 3, Han, Sun, and Wei, was in the north. And Zhou was this little state in the middle, which was just sort of like the tradition of the king, But it was really these 4 big states in each of the directions, but particularly the Qin in the west, because they had this protection of these mountains around a valley. And they were the ones that won out and established the empire. And it did go on for 500 years, like we said, from 120 states, then it was down to 40, and then there was about 6 or 7 major states, 4 in particular, particularly strong ones, and they would set up these alliances, and these rhetoricians would go around and they would try to, convince the ruler, well, you should make an alliance with this guy and make an alliance with this guy, and they had what they called vertical and horizontal, because Qin over here in the west was the big power, was really the tough one. So they would try to, make a vertical alliance with these states in here to go against Qin, try to get really all the states to go against Qin. And even when that didn't work, And so when it got to that point, it was like Qin was, they must have also had a substantial population, too, probably because of the valley. But then when you get to the spring and autumn, and then particularly in the period of warring states, it just degenerated into armies and taxing people and these huge armies fighting each other all the time, and then these guys going around and trying to make alliances, and take over each other's territories. Yeah, certainly the population was increasing. The weapons were becoming more brutal. Iron and steel were being used instead of, let's say, copper and bronze. But this period here was just so many wars between each other. And that time where I found where there's 5 years in a row that I don't know if there's any other scholar that's ever put that together, because I found that by reading the Qin Shu, the Spring and Autumn Annals, and then in the commentary, and these very obscure books really, not too many people read. I mean, Chinese scholars read them. But, this was almost like a League of Nations, or or some of the things that they had in Greece, the Amphiktyoniconic councils, where the city-states would try to stop wars by, getting everybody together and agree to it, something, right? And that actually accomplished in China way back then in the 6th century BC, and it has been compared to the League of Nations. But what I found was in another recent book that was put together by a scholar, and he had a complete chart based on these annals of every year and over all those centuries of how many wars occurred each year. And by looking over all those charts, I found that that was the time where there was the least wars, where there was like 5 years in a row and 7 out of 8 years in which there was no wars at all. And in the whole rest of the time, there was only one other time where there was even 2 in a row, with 0. So, I think that's a really particularly interesting thing because I'm a great believer in, ultimately, world democracy and a one confederation, so we won't have wars to try to settle things, And that's the thing. It seems to be a kind of a historical process that states or nations or city-states, and there's different levels of this that occur, but sometimes in feudal times, that they tend to fight among each other until there becomes an over-unifying principle that sort of unites them together, and then they don't fight with each other as much.